Hi, in this video we're going to look at solving quadratic equations using square roots. Quadratic equations have an x squared term, so it gets a little bit more challenging to solve these. We can't solve them using traditional solving equations methods. We have to have different ways. Square roots is one of them. When we're looking at problems, you'll notice that these problems, it's really good to use this method when there's no x term, like no just single x term. So you'll notice in this first example, we have 3x squared, no x term. An x squared, not next to the first. Same way in number 2. Number 4 is a great example as well. When we look at that, 4x squared, 15, no x term. That's going to be a telltale sign that using square roots is a really, really good idea. We have a few steps over here. The first thing we're going to do is isolate the squared term. When I say the squared term, it can be either x squared, like it is in example 1 here, or it might be a parenthesis where we have multiple things inside, but it's still the item that's being squared. We're going to isolate that. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and then we're going to include plus and minus with that square root because we have to include both versions. And then we're going to write our solutions. Again, items that will make this true when substituted back in. So let's get started. Example number 1, 3x squared. Looking at what is being squared, the x is being squared. We're going to isolate that. Notice no x term, only an x squared. We're going to isolate that. So isolating that, we divided both sides by 3. We have x squared is equal to 25. That's on the right track. The next step here is going to be to take the square root of both sides. A square and a square root cancel out. They undo each other, rather. And so we're left with just an x on that side. When we take the square root on this side, the thing we have to consider is the plus and the minus. The reason being is negative 5 squared is 25, and positive 5 squared is 25. So I'm just going to put this plus minus, and that is really just what I wrote there. I know it's a little hard to see here, but plus minus square root of 25, and then I'm going to simplify this down. I'm going to probably put it in my calculator. If I know it right off the bat and it's a perfect square like 25, I know that it's just positive negative 5. If it's not a perfect square, so say the square root of 26, we would want to put that in our calculator and then put plus minus whatever that might be. That's example 1. That would be our solution. So either version, positive 5 or negative 5, when substituted back in, would make this true. Looking at example number 2, looking to isolate what's being squared, the x squared is being squared, so we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. Now, when we take square roots, we can only take square roots of positive numbers. So like our next step would be square root both sides. Square root of negative 9. Nothing squared is going to give negative 9. So this one would be no solution. We cannot take the square of a negative number. Moving on to example 3. Whatever is being squared, we're going to isolate. This whole parenthesis being squared, so we're going to isolate it. It's already isolated. If it's not, then we need to do some operations to get it by itself. Here, it's already there, so we're going to square root both sides. We're not going to forget the plus minus here. So on the left side, we're left with 2x minus 1. On the right side, we have the plus minus the square root of 81. The square root of 81 is 9, so we have plus minus 9. We cannot leave it like this because we don't know what x equals. But we know that this left-hand side could be equal to positive 9, or it could be equal to negative 9. We're going to set up 2 equations to solve that out. The first equation is going to be where it's equal to positive 9. The second equation is where it's equal to negative 9. We're going to solve each of those individually so that we can find what values for x would make this true. For the left-hand side, I get x is 5. For the right-hand side, solving it quickly, I get x is negative 4. So both those, when substituted back in, should make this true. Our final example, 4x squared plus 15 equals 15. Whatever is being squared, isolated. So we're going to isolate this through operations. So subtracting 15 from both sides first, dividing by 4, we get x squared is equal to 0. Now, if we take the square root of both sides, we put our plus minus. X is equal to the plus minus, positive and negative of 0. No, it's just 0. So x is only 0. So if we run into that case, we just leave it as is. In these examples, you saw a few things that always stayed consistent. We always isolated what was being squared. Whether that was a parenthesis, whether that was just an x squared, we always isolated that portion. The second thing that you saw is all of these problems didn't have like the single x term. If it has the single x term, we're probably going to choose a different method. Square roots just isn't going to be very helpful. Thanks for tuning in. Check it out next time when we go over different methods of how we can solve these quadratic functions and equations.